Hello, everybody. We'll be starting today's webinar momentarily.
It's so wonderful to see so many people from all around the world. Hi, Narayan. Wow.
Cal, are you able to forward the slides, or are you able to pass them forward?
Yes, I'll be happy to share the slides.
Okay, sorry. So today we're excited for this webinar, Breaking the Patterns and Habits That Create Silos Within Organizations. That's all about sharing approaches to how to break down silos in the midst of accelerating change. In today's session, we'll explore why silos exist in organizations today. Between managers and employees, customers and suppliers across functions and geographies, organizations should not act the way that they are despite everything we tried to change. We try not to leave room for questions at the end of the webinar. But if you have questions along the webinar, please go ahead and ask them in the chat. So I'd like to introduce our panelists today. We are incredibly fortunate to have my friend Greg Carey with us today. Greg is our Managing Director of Exponential Leadership at SU and is one of the most forward experts on exponential leadership, a way of thinking we espouse here at SU. I also have the pleasure to ask our special guest, Mr. Kyle Hermans, joining us today. Kyle is the founder and CEO of Be Courageous and is also a Singularity faculty member in innovation and strategy. I look forward to learning more about this critical topic from the two of you today. Welcome to the webinar. A couple housekeeping items. A few housekeeping items before we get started. All participants will be muted throughout the duration of the presentation to ensure the best quality quality audio. During the presentation, if you should encounter any audio issues, please refresh your browser and check your computer's audio setting. Again, if you have questions, you can submit them anytime during the webinar by clicking the chat button. Lastly, we're recording today's webinar and we'll share it with you as a follow-up. You can listen to it again or you can share. So we'll go ahead and get started, and I'll go ahead and pass it over to Greg.
Thank you, Jesse, and welcome everyone from all over the world, in fact. Thanks so much for joining us. We're excited to share some content with you today. Before we dive in and I hand off to Kyle, I just want to set the stage in the form of a metaphor, if you will, and think about what has really driven the kind of presence of silos that we see in organizations today. And I want to think back to like the origin of organizations, really. If we think back to the Industrial Revolution, where the product, and the main kind of driver of the development was the creation of machines. And so that naturally became the metaphor for how we would think about the organization. And we use analogies within the organization to kind of reproduce that thinking. We have inputs and outputs. We're driving change in an organization. If you even think about the people, as early as 10 years ago, HR would roll out curriculum and training in order to normalize the behavior of the employees. By normalizing the behavior of the employees, you could actually contain and create a predictable environment and actually reduce the risk of the organization going off the rails or behaving in a way that would create risk. What's happened now is that those same behaviors are actually creating risk for that company. It's making it very difficult to change and move. And as a result, silos also is another element of this machine mentality. If we can go to the next slide, Kyle. So what we want to really do is think about it as a system, an ecosystem where the organization is alive and it must evolve. As we face this world of just rapidly accelerating change, we need to, adapt to the external environment around us. And it's only then through that change and our ability to adapt can we actually persist and live as an organization. So, you can poke holes in the analogy, but what I want you guys to just kind of understand right now is that, what we've created from an organization perspective has roots in what the early product was in terms of creating a machine. And then we're in this era now where it's so much more dynamic. It's alive, right? And so Kyle's going to go down into some methods for us to think about how do we navigate that change within an organization and break down those silos. So great honor to have Kyle today, who I applaud, who had to drive 3 hours outside of a high-risk zone with the fires in California. So found an Airbnb way off the grid. He's safe, thankfully. But Kyle, thanks for being with us today. And let's actually forgot about the questions. So before we go to Kyle,
Good thing.
A couple questions here that we want to get your feedback on so we can get a sense of how the room is kind of leveling out with this. So first question is, what's your biggest pain point in your organization today? And then what areas of the business are you seeing the most siloed activity? We'll give you a few moments to answer those. All right, Kyle, let's get going.
All right. Thank you so much for having me today. It is amazing just to see all the people from all over the world, all the countries coming up. This is absolutely phenomenal. We are very excited to be talking about this topic with you today. And of course, close to my heart for those that are here from South Africa, big shout out to you guys as well. So breaking silos. So there's a couple things here as we dive into this. We're going to be covering a lot of content in a real short space of time. You will be getting these slides afterwards so that you can track back through this. But a couple really important things for our conversation today. One is we want to identify the patterns and habits that are inhibiting change as it relates to breaking silos. We want to be able to identify the mindset shifts that help break those patterns of thinking, the tools to help affect the change. For those of you that are in a very complex or VUCA state of environment right now, how do we manage that chaos? And then some mechanisms for quick decisions. So we'll be covering this through the next series of slides together. So 3 key things that I want to be able to start with, and also have you write these down, because these are some lenses that I would like for you to think about as you watch and listen to this content. The 3 keys to breaking silos straight out the gate. It's your thinking, it's your mindset, how you are expanding your thinking. The second is your energy, which is really around where we are channeling our focus. If we're trying to do too much in too many places, our energy gets quite displaced, which can cause silos. So this is about channeling focus. And the third is about taking action. The first 2 are fantastic. They really get us moving. But if we don't take action on the things that we're learning here today, then what's the point? This is where silos can continue. So the more action we take, the more breakthroughs we can take together. Now, the other lens that I want you to think about as you are listening to this, and this is one of the first really, really crucial keys to breaking silos, is that we have to look at our systems and our organization as a system that is built on a foundation of habits. Now, if we want to be able to change our habits, move to healthier habits that do help to deconstruct and break down the silos inside of business, our system has to be able to absorb those habits. We can try to do as many amazing initiatives as possible from a habitual standpoint, but if our system doesn't absorb those habits, it will organ reject those things and push them out, which means our system will constantly win. So there's 2 things, there's 2 levels here that we're going to be speaking about today. The first is, what are those small minor improvements that I can start to make consistently on a habit level? And how can I start thinking about my system? So as you're listening to the rest of these slides, we're listening through a systems lens and a habit lens. So let's click into this first key, mindset, about expanding thinking. Right now, as I'm sure you've heard this before, and you must be feeling this right now as we are on this webinar together, all 600 plus of us, this is the slowest rate of change we will ever experience again for the rest of our lives. Meaning that disruption of technology, of the way our systems are working, the way that innovation is driving, the way that we are needing to make decisions, you will see here that the adoption of change and technology into our environments is happening at an exponential rate. What that is meaning is that every single industry is being pressurized by change. We are getting breakthroughs in industries unrelated. So let's just say I'm in retail and manufacturing. There could be things happening in food innovation. There could be things happening in financial systems that, with those breakthroughs and those rapid changes, they are putting pressure in on our systems, on our retail systems. None of us are going to be avoid of the disruption that is coming at us. And you can see how fast customers are coming online and adopting, which means there are so many new minds that are getting access to internet and technology and adopting this change, which means that we're getting more people looking for breakthroughs, looking for change, looking to have better lives, that disruption and those improvements are just stacking and increasing. And so what I did in preparation for this webinar is, here you'll see just 30 technologies that are coming at us over the next decade. And what I thought about was understanding some of the people that were signing up, which of these 30 would be impacting us. And what we landed on was that all of them are. that we have so many new changes happening, everything from mobility to the way that internet is working, to the way that artificial intelligence is changing things, to the way that we're interacting with each other, to how we are using our natural resources, and so the list can go on. I'll leave this with you to be able to just look through those. But what this is causing over here, if you think about just yourself, there is a newfound type of pressure that is being put on us as individual leaders, as individuals trying to grow business or, follow our career paths within our business. And so if you see over here, you can see that the pressure that is coming from the outside in is hitting us from all angles. There is the pressure on the organization that is coming from changes in industry, that is coming from just progress and evolution. And this is just evolution and progress of our human evolution on how we are advancing life for all forward through this advent of technology, how we are solving 100-year-old problems. But just think about the pressure that is coming down onto your industry to make the change, which in turn is putting pressure on your organization to show up differently every day, which in turn is putting pressure on you as a leader. Now, one of the things here is that what we've noticed scientifically is that when we as human beings are put under immense amount of pressure, one of the last things we do is actually turn around and ask for help or be vulnerable or reach out to others. We actually get more reclusive. We actually go inside, which in some way, the more pressure we feel and the more pressure an organization feels, they try to lock down on the things that have been working for them in the past, which automatically starts to create a type of siloing. Not right now, I have to handle this. Not right now, I have to solve this problem. Where the changes for us are actually about flipping and inversing this model. One of the things that is also happening with this disruption and change is that our perspective of thinking, because remember, we're talking about mindset over here. Most industries, especially legacy companies, for any of you that are in really large organizations that have had the privilege and honor of being present for 20, 30, 40, 50 years or more, what is happening is that our systems of business, we often are looking backwards in order to look forward. We calibrate ourselves and measure ourselves over past success to be able to plan for the future. But as you can see, the disruption that is happening is coming from the future. It's disrupting us in ways because the mindset and the thinking patterns of some of these new business technologies, leaders and industries, they're going beyond just rational thinking or just looking diversely at their competition. They're starting to imagine futures that don't even exist. They're starting to go to new places to find breakthroughs. And they are starting to bring ideas that in the rational sense of things, we might think are completely irrelevant, or in some cases, immoral or illegal based on the fabric of the way that society works right now. And some companies are pushing even further out to things that we would just say, well, that is completely outrageous. And one of the examples that we use when we're speaking with audiences is to say, and if I could see you all raise your hands with this, I would say, how many of you had your parents tell you when you were younger not to get into cars with strangers? And I could imagine that most of you would raise your hand. How many of you did that this week without even second guessing that? For those of you that ride with the likes of Ubers or Lyfts or from other countries that you're in that have ride sharing vehicles. Not that long ago, this was an outrageous concept. Now it is just woven into the fabric of how we operate. People are shifting and challenging the way we think. One of the ways that we can start to break silos as well as advance our business is to start imagining not only trying to solve for our future by standing in our present and looking backwards, but it's actually to solve for our present from the future. The companies that are disrupting and are pushing their thinking really far out and then working feasibility back from outrageous places to be able to change the way we are doing things. But this requires some different discipline for a company. Most companies aren't wired to operate this way. So I'm going to offer something to you here. We believe that there are 4 types of futures ahead of you. And each one of these futures has a very different journey, a different way of communicating, a different way of operating, and a different way of interacting as an ecosystem inside of your organizations together based on the one that you choose. So the 4 types of future. The first one is a future that you're chasing. When we talk about chasing, it's when your competition or you see the world moving at a rapid pace and you're saying, wow, the gap is really increasing. I need to catch up. Now, what that means when you're chasing is that you are almost designing everything in your business to move towards what someone else is creating. Then there's the future where you're defending. If you've been in business a long time, or you understand that you have something that this is the way we do it, this is the way we've always done it, I will defend our position and I will defend the way that we believe that the world should work. What ends up happening from a place of defense is as the world is shifting and moving in disruption, you become very exposed to that disruption. And defense might not always be right for the future, because what we did as companies or as employees that got us from where we started to where we are today may not necessarily be the same things that get us from where we are to where we want to go. And we have to keep ourselves thinking about that. The third future is about the one that you want to change. If you look at the world and you say, look, I see a lot of problems in my industry. I see my competitors not doing things the right way. I think I could do them better. This is really obviously admirable and honorable. And so when you're looking to change a current system, it's a really, really great start. But what if that system is actually on its way out or ripe for disruption? Are we getting caught up in a cycle of static and staying the same? Then there's the one that you create, the future where you look at the future and you say, how would I like this to be instead? If I could create it any way that I want, what would I do differently? The one that you create, when you chase for something like that, or when you move towards something that you're creating, you no longer have to chase, defend, or change. Those will naturally get solved when you are looking for something to create. And so what I'm offering you here when we're talking about breaking silos is that when we're chasing something, we have to stay locked into our positions. If we're defending something, that actually encourages more siloed thinking. When it comes down to changing, we're also siloing ourselves between us versus them. When we're creating, we're looking at how we can move the system as a whole. And again, the journey is vastly different based on the one that you choose to accept. And I can surely feel that I can understand which energy you would prefer to have. Now, one of the other biggest things that organizations suffer from where silos don't get broken is because the necessity to change the way that the system works together, the ecosystem works together, is just not there. They say, well, it actually works really well the way it is, or it might be slightly dysfunctional, but we're making a profit. It might not fully work in harmony, but we're making progress. What we found is that if it is not a physiological necessity, and this, by the way, is Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if we don't have the need to overcome or break through in terms of shifting silos or working more collaboratively together, if that's not a fundamental need, what we've found is that people just won't do it. They may get, again, this is the systems and habits. They may start with a habit and it may run for just a short journey of time, but then the system itself doesn't have the necessity, so it will push that out. So as if the system has to find that physiological need, and when I talk about physiological, it has to be as important to you as taking in air or drinking water or eating food or protecting our family. The need to, and again, this isn't just survival mode, but it's the need for progress. It's the need to bring people together has to be there on such a fundamental and foundational layer. So that's about mindset. Now, what's interesting with mindset, if we're just thinking about that in terms of elevating up, energy, where are we putting our energy? A lot of siloing happens inside of organizations because our energy can get a little stuck. Inside of a system, some places may be in flow, other places may be stuck. And what we found here, and this will be important for every single person on this webinar, and I'm sure we've all experienced this at some point. I'm sure if I could say, raise your hands or give me a yes in the chat box if you've experienced this before, is that inside of an organization, what causes us to remain in a siloed situation is that the mental energy, when we want to bring our thinking, our creativity, our ideas, our motivations, our experience into our system, but our system is slightly punishing or adversarial or only supportive, meaning like, sure, I don't really agree with you, but you can carry on doing what you're doing. If we don't feel that we are supported, or that if we feel our environment is slightly punishing, we will keep all of our energy to ourselves. We will keep all of our thinking to ourselves. It becomes self-focused because we go into a protective mode. If you saw that psychological need, our psychological need is to defend. It's to protect. It's to protect my ideas. I don't want to put myself out there. I may get fired. I may get rejected. I may not fit in with the rest of my team. My ideas might be too big, which leaves me as an outlier. Now, if an organization that we've seen can move the environment and the climate up to cooperative or collaborative or even coordinated, meaning we are in a shared place together, you will notice that our mental energy naturally moves from the self without even trying to focusing on the task, which means we move from siloed thinking to collaborative and shared community thinking. That allows us to focus on big things. Then the question that organizations ask is, how big can I go? What kind of challenges can I solve in the world? And so I'm showing you over here that every single one of you is probably part of a system, whether you are a sole proprietor starting your own business, whether you are part of a large ecosystem. And we're just showing you this for illustrative means. But if you had to just do a diagram of how your operational structure works, your people structure, how do you get things done? How do you drive business forward? You'll notice here that there's some companies that run from a top-down system. Some are more into a matrix, autonomous, interconnected effect. Others are actually competing by department. This was during the jobs area, which is like there might be a very, very strong leader that is saying to you, this is how it gets done, and you just need to execute. And then there are others which are different businesses, or here, which is just a massive network effect of different industries. Now, just think about trying to align any of these systems to go after a shared sense of purpose or after solving a challenge together. Which type of system creates silos and which type of system does not? What we found here is almost biomimicry with nature, that a very interesting way to start thinking about structuring your organization or structuring the people inside of your organization is finding the crucial roles inside of the system and then being able to link them together around a shared sense of purpose or a shared sense of direction, whether that's your strategy, your mission, your purpose, whether those are values you're striving to, or a massive challenge that you're an MTP that you're trying to solve for. And then as you figure out the right talent in each of those areas, they are all interconnected here, working their way up to a centralized place. But the system in its whole is going after things together rather than a hierarchical system. So you can see that things are starting to adapt in nature. And this is, again, technology is forcing us just to connect differently. So one of the crucial lessons here for this in terms of, again, energy, we found that the way to think about this is through the concept of altitudes. Our total system that you just saw over here, our total system, if we stack that in terms of altitudes, you have very different types of people inside of your business. You've got those that are very detail-oriented. They're looking down at the details. They're making sure that everything is done correctly. You know, we were thinking about this the other day, that if you launch a rocket into space, because there's so much about space travel right now, if you launch a rocket into space, but those screws on the panel that help protect from the heat as it's going up aren't done correctly in the details, that ship may explode. It may really hinder the journey. Details matter. But now what's interesting inside of organizations, based on our layers and our levels and our titles and our functions, each of us are required to do different things or have different levels of perspective. If you're down here in the detail, looking almost at ground level, the higher up you go to those that are in leadership, needing to look at the 100,000-foot view, I have to see far into the future. I have to analyze everything we've done. I've got to be able to see the total system and landscape. The roles and responsibilities at each of these levels are very different. And if we don't have effective communication running through or shared communication running through to understand why does this detail of this job matter to this large purpose, and why does this large purpose matter to the detail, what ends up happening for us is we actually get trapped. Siloing becomes, because using this as a metaphor, it gets trapped because we get altitude sickness. If you stay too long in one position, trapped only in one view, thinking that this is the way things work, that can really break things down. It can break things down into silos, because then suddenly conflict starts to develop within the system. If we can't understand each other's perspective and why the details matter and why the high level vision matters, we could get trapped. Now, what's very important, the altitude model and the recommendation here to break those silos is, as you are getting together to try and move work forward, it's really important to get some perspective at the different levels of where this work matters and how this work is going to get rolled out. And if you can spend a little time understanding, it doesn't mean you have to do someone else's job, but if you can spend a little time understanding each other, you'll be able to overcome the altitude sickness. You'll be able to start operating in a much better system. Because what happens if we don't, and we go back to this idea that you saw all this rapid growth, right? All of this rapid growth happening in the world right now. Our problems are going to scale and grow just as fast as our exponential growth that we're striving for if we don't address those problems early. What happens if we think they're too small and insignificant today, and we keep putting them off or not addressing them? This could be around communication. This could be around our shared sense of vision. This could be around how we incentivize people in the business. This could feel, if I feel heard and seen at work, if I feel like I can contribute effectively in my job. If we don't address those early, those problems compound exponentially. And there'll be a time as you're progressing and starting to go for this growth, that the infrastructure that you've laid down, and this is where silos can really, really help, or hurt, altitudes can really help, but silos can really hurt us, is the more siloed we get when we're trying to go for growth that requires everybody to come along on the journey, the gap between here to here is far too great. So I'll leave you with one other thing over here as we move on to the next section, is this idea of that transformative purpose. If you're shooting for something big on a really high altitude, why are we in business? What change are we trying to effect? What change are we trying to make? Who are we trying to change? Why is that important? What kind of future are we trying to create together? When you have that type of large perspective that's guiding you, now what are those 1% daily improvements that we could start doing on a small level every day that may never get celebrated, that may not even go noticed? What are those small daily improvements that we can start to affect? When you do daily improvements consistently, it can also reach exponential outcomes. We've been practicing this on ourselves, where we've tried to take a healthy eating habit, or drinking a little more water each day. We did this for 37 days. We've tried this with health, with fitness, with communication, just in amongst our own teams. And we've noticed that after a month, just shy of 40 days, the improvements that have happened in our health and in our communication in our own system are massive. So one of the ways to start doing that when we are pushing up is that another thing that forces us into silos, and you'll hear this from Singularity a lot, is that what is required these days is to shift our minds from looking at the world as things being scarce and moving more towards a world of abundance. How can we try and make more abundance for all? What's interesting with silos can almost be compared to polarity battles, meaning I have to do this, you have to do that. What we have to do is separate. And sometimes we forget to check, what are they both in service of? Now, we're incentivized inside of organizations to compete against each other. Do a job really well, you will get promoted. Do a job really well, you'll get higher compensation. This team is against that team. And I'm not saying these things are wrong. Healthy competition is always helpful. But if you are looking to try break silos, we have to figure out, how are we competing towards the same outcome, and then there's some benefit out of that. What we found is that if we spend too much time competing, we're actually putting ourselves into a mindset of scarcity, meaning you have something I don't have, I need to get that from you. That's a competitive nature, but that's also a scarcity mindset. If we can push up and say, how can we create a better outcome together? And we could be incentivized to kind of nudge each other to move towards this, and there's some friendly and healthy competition in it. That will start to change the game and actually start to move silos differently. So I'll leave you here with this one as well, just as we are going into taking action, is this idea that with silos, you can look at it almost in an older system. An older system was that there's one person at the top who's generally right, or that leadership is right, and then it cascades down. It cascades down. Now you break any one of these out, but this kind of almost forces, I'm this, you're that, it has to chunk up to here, then it goes up to there. This is in some way, it was an old system that worked to progress business and our life where it is now. But with our community system, with our internet system, with everybody getting online, with silos breaking down, walls breaking down, decentralization happening, all those kinds of things, if we start to look at what is the role that each of us can play collectively in an ecosystem, if I had to say to you, where's the leader inside of this system? Where's the leader here? We might not see it. Maybe everybody's a leader. Where's the leader here? Probably up here. But over here, if we can all start to work together towards a common purpose, this is where silos start to change. So taking action, breaking through together. This is going to come back on you, and I'm sure you probably anticipated that this would happen because it's actually true. What if change starts with me? So many times, we are looking outside of ourselves. Well, the problem's over there, the problem's over here, the problem's with this person, the problem's with that part of the system. The way we can affect change and the way that we can start to dislodge and break down silos is to have the goal that we would like to be silo-free. We would like to be more collaborative. So what if change starts with me? What if I'm the one that has to start putting my first foot forward in order to get there? So I have a little challenge for you, and I invite you to actually ask this question for the very next meeting, maybe after this webinar that you're going into, because I'm sure your agendas must be full of meetings. We love to have meetings inside of businesses. But ask yourself, when you sit there, how many people are in this meeting? And you may look around the room, maybe you're in a meeting with 12, and you say, there's 12. Like right now, I can see here, there's 626 people in this meeting together. But is that true? So I want to show you this. Yes, there's me, and yes, there's the people that I see directly. But then how many employees do our business have? How many customers does our business have? And then how many customers do our customers have? And what ends up happening is you realize that if you are wanting to get yourself out of a siloed way of thinking, it's about the ripple effect. I have to go beyond just thinking about the self and just those in direct proximity to me. What does this decision affect? What does the next decision affect? What does the next decision affect? And if you can think about the system being a little bigger and a little further out, you'll start to shift the mentality of moving away from silos automatically. Because if you can make decisions here with the end users in mind, or with people 3 or 4 steps ahead of you, you're naturally and automatically needing to bring more people together to get there. This is a really interesting exercise for you to play with, taking those extra steps. So if you want to get that growth, if you want to break those silos and get that compounding growth, there's a couple of things to think about here. Those 1% improvements every day, I'm going to give you just a couple quick framings on this one. The first, and each of you can try this by yourselves. What do you need at your core as an individual, because change is starting with you, what do you need at your core to be able to make the right decisions that will move you towards stronger growth and towards being less siloed and more collaborative? What are some of the short-term things that you could partner with somebody else on, or a group of people on, so you can start getting some wins? You can actually see what change is like when you bring people together with you on that journey. Next level up here, what are some bigger growth goals that put me outside of my individual comfort zone, that require me to build a system around me of different people and different habits that allow me to progress? And as I'm learning from these 3 areas, what information and knowledge do I have that I could start to share with other people? How can I build bridges? If you go into every day saying, what bridge could I build today? What piece of information could I give to somebody in my business that has nothing to do with me, but I know that we're working on the same thing? Maybe I've learned something that could help them. When you do these 4 steps, it really brings you up to an ecosystem enterprise way of thinking, meaning that you are thinking about not just yourselves, but you're thinking about your total system, and you're thinking about your customers. If you can make little improvements and ask yourself questions on these things every day and take small, consistent actions, you will find that you will start to achieve exponential growth. So as I'm wrapping up here, a couple of things I want to leave you with. It starts with you. It really does start with you. To break down silos, find a way that you could start to collaborate or have a conversation with somebody that you would think you're in silo situation with. Just break that chain today. Go for a coffee, go for a lunch, have a conversation, send a note, pass on some knowledge. Elevate from competition to creativity. Instead of competing all the time against each other, what if we co-created together? And a challenge culture is a learning culture, meaning that if you set challenges that require you to pull in some other support, you will get to learn together. Leading with purpose, that higher altitude, and gratitude. Be grateful for the situations that you're in. Be grateful for the resources that you have around you. It'll change your mind frame. And if you're stuck, remember, we can make that problem harder. We want to elevate our energy up the altitude and elevate our thinking. We can expand that out. And consistent 1% improvements will compound into exponential change. They will compound into exponential change. So thank you very much. It's been incredible to talk to you. I'm going to flip it back over to Greg, who's going to summarize all of this. And I just want to say that you have all of our support. This ecosystem already, just us coming together on this call, 620 of us coming together on this call has been amazing. And together, I know that we can make the change. Greg, take it away.
Thank you, Kyle. That was great as usual. I appreciate it. Just want folks to know we see a bunch of questions coming in. If we can't get to them today, we can certainly follow up in some fashion with them, and we got an offer to kind of open this up to others to have some more one-on-one time to kind of diagnose and talk about what's happening within your organization. Next slide, Kyle. If we think about kind of the metaphor that we said at the beginning, which is, this idea of being a machine where something is fixed and really can't respond to change. It needs to be fixed almost, versus an ecosystem where the mindset is about being alive and responding to the ecosystem around. You can kind of see how that applies and filters down to what Kyle has laid out for us. When he talks about the mindset and expanding our thinking, that is so critical. Do not discount that, and actually spend time each day kind of figuring out where is that mindset that you're bringing and representing into your work. He talked about the path that we have to choose. Are we defending? Are we competing? Are we changing, or are we creating? Right? Creating starts to break down different walls, right? You go away from being competitive even within your own ecosystem to a larger purpose, right? And so once we start kind of really changing how we think, only then can actions be influenced in how we do, right? So it doesn't start with us just coming together and what do we do about it? How do we really think about it? And then the energy and our focus is really, if you think about being alive, it needs to be driven by the curiosity around your environment and being open and receptive to your peers, the proximity that you have to leaders or essentially and ultimately the customers. Right? So how do you keep that driving curiosity to be concerned about that external ecosystem and not get caught within your own altitude, but think about ways that you can kind of migrate up and down through curiosity and focus to get to the right answer. And it may, obviously it takes a collective effort to really shift the organization, and there's things that we can do that are more kind of, systemic to kind of drive this change. But it really does come down to us. And I think some of Kyle's kind of instructions about what can we do, it's that 1% behavior that we can all take on. But if one of us then, if we think about exponential change, and sure, that 1% kind of multiplied and amplified then turns into exponential impact. Well, your own behavior then influences a peer, right? And then you have 2 people that have an impact, and then you have 4, right? So it's important on us to not kind of discount the role that we can play in driving that change and being, accountable to our own representation. So, with that, we hope this is giving you at least a high level orientation of some ways to start these conversations with yourself, with your team, with your with your peers and your mentors. really grateful for the time. As I said, there's a ton of questions, and we will follow up in written form with these, and there is an opportunity that we're gonna share with you right now. So, Jesse, you want to take over?
Yeah, thank you so much. The information was amazing. So we're super excited to offer today's participants of this live webinar two very special offers. So the first offer that we're going to provide to this webinar attendees, and we are going to have some time to answer questions at the end, but I want to put these out there. So we don't do this very often, but we are pleased to offer a $1,450 discount to our most exclusive executive program in Santa Clara, California on December 8th through the 13th. You can join the 1,000 of SU EP alumni by attending this last executive program of 2019. So if you're interested in this program, you can visit the URL at the bottom of the slide, or you can also email sr@su.org. But you can go to that URL, you can apply, and that discount will be applied once you're accepted into that program. And I do know seats are limited there, but we are filling them up for the end of the year. The second offer, which is also, I think, is extremely exciting as well. This is your opportunity to work directly with Kyle and Greg. It is a no-cost 45-minute coaching session for the first 20 qualified webinar attendees. So this is, again, it's something that we don't do at all. Is to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time we've ever done this. And we understand that everybody has silos in their organization, and this is a great opportunity for you to work with Kyle and or Greg to help talk through your organization's silos and some basic strategies on overcoming those. And if you're interested, please email us at sr@su.org. You could provide us with as much information about yourself and about your organization. And if some of the things that Kyle talked about resonate with you, put those in the email as well. It gives us as much context as possible, so Kyle and Greg can have a look at those, and we'll be sending you a notification that you've been accepted as one of those 245 or those 20 45-minute sessions. So again, if you have any questions about the webinar, you can email us at sr@su.org. But we do have some time to answer some questions. So Kyle and Greg, I'm going to go ahead and start asking you a couple of these. The first question was, how should an organization implement this new technology into becoming more interactive or automated to absorb this challenge in order to grow globally?
Great question. How to integrate it more in an interactive, automated way?
Yeah, interactive or automated way to absorb this change in order to grow globally.
Greg, shall I jump in here?
Feel free.
So one of the things that we've found is that because as an organization grows to a certain size, the ability for us to connect as people starts to get less and less. We start to rely on legacy systems, our automation systems. So whether that's project management software, whether you are on Trello or Slack or any of the chat programs or any of those kinds of things, what is happening there is our ability to build relationships with each other becomes harder. One of the things that I would say to overcome silos inside of a system that is starting to rely a lot more heavily on legacy systems is we must make the time for relationships. One of the things would be to say, as we're automating, which part of this is still human and which part of this can rely on technology and automation. What we've been doing is almost taking everything that is human principled and automating everything, but we're also automating out some of our human dynamic. What we're finding inside of companies that we're trying to create those really key moments, and it doesn't have to be long hours and hours of time, but how can you make sure that you have human touch points as well as legacy touch points and use technology for what it really is, which is a powerful tool to help us be more efficient. It's not meant to replace relationships. It's meant to help harness them. So connecting with human touch points is one way. As you're scaling with those systems and automation, make sure you make time for each other.
Great, thank you so much. So the next question is, could you explain a little bit more about the psychological mentality in the organization? And how do you think we could fight that mentality?
I guess that there's quite a lot. I'd love to find out a little more about that question, but I'm gonna take it through the lens of breaking silos. I think that what we're competing against inside is a system and a structure that is just, again, remember very first slide, systems and habits. We have a system that is operated very efficiently in a certain way. Most of our old companies, or most of companies, bar the last 10, 15 years, have been built on being masters of operations, at scaling operations. We've generally hired people who are masters at operating. We've also hired people that are masters at processes. And now what's happening is, with a lot of change and disruption, that is needing to create more connections in terms of creativity. How do we problem solve in real time, which is something slightly different from operations. That's about creativity. That's about innovation. That's about thinking slightly differently. And so, again, I would invite you not to think about fighting against the system, but it's helping to move the system to say, maybe this particular way doesn't work for us anymore. We have to get back in and bring cross-functional people together to have a shared conversation. So it's not just relying on one leader's shoulders or one areas of the business shoulders. Ideas can now come from anywhere, and we all have to implement these decisions. So if we can move from that competitive and fighting and find a challenge that is worth us all getting together to solve for, you will notice a shift in leadership will start to happen almost automatically.
Great. There was another question that came in pretty early on. It was about, what is the meaning of silo you are fighting against? Do you mean to break fear and resistance?
Great question. Really great question. I would want to flip that back to you, and this is probably a whole nother dialogue we could have offline, is around what does siloing mean in your business? I think that siloing is a type of a mindset. It could be fear and resistance to change. Siloing could also be that this team works on this, you work on this. I have spent my whole life building expertise. What do you know about what I know about? It could be different. It's like asking marketing to try and solve an information technology problem. You would think automatically that may not be the right thing. They don't have the mastery and expertise. We do. That's siloing. Siloing could also be the way that we rewarded and incentivized. If I'm not incentivized to work with you or to collaborate with you, I'm going to keep all my information and I'm going to keep all my goodness to myself. That in itself is siloing. So it can take on very different forms. With this one, I was really trying to go for a universal version of it, which is the mindset. We silo ourselves in our thinking. We silo ourselves with energy in where we consolidate our energy in a business. Do we do that together or separate that out? And we also silo in terms of how we take action. If I don't bring you along on the journey, get a breakthrough, but then have to fling it over to you at some other point, that never is creating a really great bridge. So I was talking about silos through those three particular lenses.
Awesome. So there was another question about, how can we break silos when there's no trust among our peers?
Greg, do you want to take one of these? You want me to keep jumping in?
Go ahead.
Okay. So the question again, Jesse, just real quick, is about how do we break
silos when there's no trust among our peers?
This is such a huge question, and it's probably one that is at the forefront of most of the reason why silos start. If I can't trust you to have my back, remember we talked about the hierarchy of needs. If I don't feel psychologically safe with you, I'm going to keep my task to myself. If I feel in any way punished or unsupported, I'm going to keep this to myself because I don't think that I can fully trust you. One of the only ways we can overcome trust is through second chances, is through offering somebody an opportunity to try again, or maybe recognizing that the way we constantly doing it on a day-to-day basis is not actually building up collaboration. It's building up polarity battles. Is there another thing that we should be working on together? Is there another way to address it? For me, I say go straight to the source. If you feel there's a group of people that you can't trust inside the organization, knock on their door, go take them out for coffee and say, I really want to work on something with you. I want to work and push this business forward, but I don't feel like we are operating from a great place of trust. can we address that together? How can we work on that together? That is one of the single most courageous conversations you can have, and it will start to instantly build rapport and trust between your peers for you to be able to go and have that kind of honest dialogue.
Great.
Kyle, and one thing I would add to that is, whether it's, the company's purpose or the purpose of you partnering with that peer, that's going to be critical, right? Oftentimes that trust is due to differing priorities, but if you can come together and really anchor on, why are we working together? Why is it important that we work together, and think about what that higher shared purpose is, then you can map each other's behavior to one that is kind of in support of each other.
Great. So we do have a couple more questions, but when we've got about 5 minutes remaining, what I would like to do now is if Cody, if he can share the results of the polls so we can better understand what they were. So it looks like leadership and management was the number one, and engagement and communication. So Kyle and Greg, do you see that as a surprise?
No, not so much. I mean, it's terrible to say, but not so much.
I think what that shows is, oftentimes it's felt where at your closest proximity touch points, right? It's the relationship you have with your manager, the guidance that you see in your kind of silo. It's the type of communication. Communication is a big part, and you often hear about things like through the rumor mill rather than an orchestrated conversation, right? And then you don't really get that nurtured narrative that's meant to kind of support a larger kind of shared purpose together. So the proximity of those top two in your day-to-day really makes sense.
Awesome. So before, I'm going to basically go to the last polling question, and there was a question related to that one that I want to tie the two together. But I want everybody to know, if we did not answer your question today, Kyle and Greg were so gracious to say that they would go through and answer the questions for you, and we will send them out in more of an FAQ style format after they've had a chance to go through them. It may take a couple of days to get there, but they promise that they'll do that. So the last polling question, so it looked like senior management was the area that was most siloed at 48%. So I'm going to pose this question that came earlier is, how do you get upper management to open up their mindset? Because it looks like that's a big problem.
That is a great question. What's interesting with both of these and just looking at the polling is that when you see the older system of, and one thing I wanted to share is that to have empathy on senior leaders, if you saw their rate of disruption and the sizes of the decisions that anybody in a leadership position, anyone on this webinar, anyone on these calls, you're in a really, really tough situation right now. There's an immense amount of disruption. We've been able to rely on business being as business has always gone up until this type of time, where everything is just going into a state of chaos and turbulence. And what we do is we try to hunker down on our expertise. We try to hunker down on the way we've known how to do things and what's created the success for ourselves. And sometimes that in itself could be the blockage. For any leader at this day and age, there is nothing wrong with holding up your hand and saying, I don't know. I don't have all the answers. It takes an immense amount of courage. But to say that I don't know, the reason why you have such a great employee group around you is you've hired them for their minds. You've hired them for their talent. You've hired them for their ideas. Taking something that you can't solve as a leader and giving it graciously to your ecosystem does a bunch of things here. If you look at that question number one, what it does is it starts to drive better communication and engagement. It allows people to start growing their talent and their development. It allows you to think about the processes and systems that need to change, that don't put so much weight on leadership and stifle or bottleneck the business, and then be able to grow the other areas. I think that I would do a huge, what do we even call that? It's almost like it's not just a recommendation, it's a challenge. It's a challenge to the leaders on this webinar, which is to say, if you don't have all the answers, we're not meant to have all the answers. The whole point of the future is we're trying to solve unsolvable problems right now. But if you don't have all the answers, ask the people around you, put it back out to your system, and just watch how much amazing ideas and talent that you actually have around you. That's how I would answer that one.
Well, awesome, Kyle and Greg. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy days to participate and present such amazing information, answering the questions. So Singularity University and Be Courageous would like to thank you for attending today's webinar. If you have any questions or concerns, please do not hesitate to reach out to us at sr@su.org. Again, sr@su.org. And thank you again so much for joining us, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.